Hi everyone, Jennifer Blevins-Smith with Integral Clinic Solutions, and you're watching my YouTube channel, Navigating the Business of Medicine. Today we're going to talk about CAQH ProView Management, why it matters for provider credentialing and cash flow. Unfortunately, in my experience, provider credentialing kind of stays in the background most days until something breaks or goes wrong, right? A missing document, an expired DEA or license, you missed the CAQH attestation. It can all delay payer enrollment, unfortunately. And these issues can affect re-credentialing as well, with network participation and reimbursement, because it's all related. So CAQH is not just a profile. It is a key operational tool for commercial payer credentialing, okay? So let's talk about CAQH ProView and what it is, okay? CAQH ProView is a centralized credentialing data repository used by many commercial payers. Yes, I am stressing commercial payers because Medicaid and Medicare do not use CAQH, okay? Medicare uses PECOS. I'm sure you've heard of PECOS, P-E-C-O-S, and that is an acronym. That is where everything takes place for provider enrollment and credentialing. And then most Medicaid, state Medicaids have their own portal that you have to do the same, okay? There are other commercial payers that will require separate documentation or separate applications as well, but a lot use CAQH instead of having you reinvent the wheel, okay? Providers enter professional, educational, licensure, malpractice, and practice information in their CAQH profile. Participating payers can access the profile for credentialing and re-credentialing. It reduces duplicate data entry across commercial payer applications. That is one thing that is so nice about it. And CAQH does not replace every payer or government enrollment system, which I just talked about, and we'll talk about it a little bit further here, okay? Why does CAQH accuracy matter? Well, CAQH should match the provider's CV, curriculum vitae, payer applications, licenses, malpractice face sheets, and enrollment records, okay? Everything needs to be congruent. Everything you've completed, everything the provider has completed or a previous person responsible for credentialing or re-credentialing, every piece of the puzzle has to match. The names have to match exactly, the MPIs, the education, the professional background, licensures, all that all needs to be consistent and the same across the board, okay? Any inconsistent dates, locations, names, or employment history can trigger payer questions. I've had to answer those for some providers. Payers may request clarification during primary source verification, especially with initial credentialing. Small discrepancies can delay enrollment, and that is very frustrating, but very true. And CAQH should act as the practice's credentialing source of truth. Yes, and I've talked about this in other videos, but the CAQH is kind of like your main repository, where if you're filling out another application for another entity, you should be using the information from CAQH. For example, if a provider's CV has one employment date and the CAQH says another, and the payer application says something different, then that can create unnecessary follow-up and delays. So everything has to match. The CAQH ProView account has ownership and access that's usually for the provider themselves. Every individual provider has their own ProView account, okay? Now, sometimes, a lot of times, they will give access to their manager, their credentialing specialist, someone like that, to maintain it for them. However, Ultimately, it is the provider's responsibility to make sure everything is how it should be and it's reattested to. I know a lot of people will disagree with this, but at the end of the day, it's their professional well-being that relies on this. The CAQH profile belongs to the individual provider, and therefore it is not the employer or a staff member's responsibility at the end of the day to make sure everything is updated and done. Yes, it could be a responsibility, it could be an expectation of a staff member to have this on their to-do list, and it is part of their expectations. However, ultimately responsible is going to be the provider, okay? Providers should maintain control of the account throughout their career. They shouldn't be changing the address, email address to an employer or an employee of the employer. It should remain their email address. They should avoid using a clinic-controlled email as the only access point. They should never change it to a employee-owned email either. Like, they should use a personal email address, because if they switch employers and they can't get access to that email to get a code that's generated or something like that, then that can be a problem too, and you have to call ProView, and that's a big thing. So providers really should use their own personal email address that they take with them no matter who they work for, and they use it ongoing over the years, okay? Staff, consultants, or managers can help maintain the profile. However, again, at the end of the day, it is the provider's responsibility, and the provider should still retain primary access and recovery options. If a provider leaves a practice and loses access to an employer email account, recovery can become difficult, like I said, and staff turnover can also create access problems. So like if a manager at a clinic is the one who has access and they leave or they get fired, whatever the reason could be, then nobody would be able to get into that without having the provider call and try to restart it, okay? And that can delay things unnecessarily as well. So what are some common CAQH information that is needed and documentation? The CAQH requires detailed provider information and supporting documents. If you've never been in CAQH, then this might be new to you. Hopefully you have and you're a little familiar with it. But the most common information that's maintained in CAQH is legal name and demographics, the type 1 MPI or MPI 1, state licenses, DEA registration, CDS registrations if applicable, education and training history, employment history, hospital affiliations, board certifications, practice locations, W-9 and billing entity information. Some of the key documents that are stored and required in CAQH for those payers are medical licenses, DEA certificates, malpractice face sheets or COIs, board certifications, W-9 forms, and professional certifications. And as a reminder, CAQH does not automatically update renewed documents, okay? Renewed licenses, DEAs, malpractice policies, they have to be manually updated by someone in the practice or by the provider themselves. They don't just automatically get there, somebody has to maintain it. And with that being said, there is a 120-day attestation that is required in CAQH, okay? So CAQH profiles must be reattested to every 120 days. They will send emails to the email and file for the provider's profile email address, and it will say, hey, CAQH expires in 90 days, and then 60 days, and 30 days. I mean, they send a ton of emails. So a lot of providers would just like forward me that email to say, hey, Jen, just a heads up, my CAQH is going to expire, and can you reattest for it, right? They owned it, they had that communication, but they knew it was an expectation of mine for them that they forward it to me if they want me to maintain it for them, okay? So they would forward it to me so I would know. The provider or authorized manager must review and confirm the profile. Missed attestations can limit payer access, which I have seen that happen. Payers may not be able to retrieve the profile during credentialing or re-credentialing. And a lot of times when you get the notifications from the payers that you're due for re-credentialing, they will remind you, hey, make sure everything's accurate and updated in CAQH, even if you're in between attestation periods, and just go in there and double check, which I appreciate that. And it's a very good tip and people should follow that. And then I just reattest even if it's not due for reattestation, just so that it helps me know that if I've gone in there and done it, it's taken care of in case I forget. Okay. If it's not taken care of, it can lead to delays, follow-up requests, or possible participation issues with the networks. Okay. The 120-day attestation is literally one of the easiest things that you could be responsible for, but it could be detrimental if it's a missed task, right? Like, it's so easy to log in, hit reattest, make sure everything looks good, right? But if you miss it, it can cause really big problems downstream financially and professionally for the provider. It's just not worth it. So it's one of those things you really need to stay on top of and do when it is necessary. Now, there is a practice manager portal and it helps with workflow efficiency. Okay, the CAQH practice manager portal can reduce duplicate work for groups with multiple providers. Okay, this manager portal allows for the group's information to be entered in CAQH, and it can all be centralized for the group information there. So the locations, the addresses, the billing details, group information can all be managed more efficiently in this individual portal. And then providers can link to that practice instead of having to manually insert all the information. So if a manager has created a CAQH profile for the group, and then the provider logs in under their own login and they search for that group, they should be able to just pull in that group's information without having to manually enter it. It's really nice. And then global payer authorization settings can reduce delays when payers request access. So there is a place in there as well where you can allow any insurance to have access to the profiles if they request it, or you can approve them individually. There's a few different settings you can choose. I turned on just to let anybody and everybody that requests access to have access, because it just made everyone's life easier. But it's up to you how you want to manage that part, okay? So let's talk about sustainable CAQH management strategy. Successful CAQH management requires a proactive maintenance workflow. Hopefully you have someone who is responsible for this, is well aware of it, they're comfortable using it, because it is something that being proactive is definitely going to benefit everybody, not just the group, not just the individual provider, but everyone as a whole. I recommend some of the following workflows as it relates to managing the CAQH profiles, okay? Track expiration dates for licenses, DEAs, CDS, malpractice, any other certifications. I talk about this in many of my videos, but it's very applicable here. Review CAQH profiles regularly. I think I would go in like every month for my providers just to check and make sure everything looked okay. Complete attestations before the deadline. Don't wait for the day of, don't wait for the week of. Try to do it at least 2 weeks in advance if possible. Keep provider controlled email access. We already talked about that. Audit CAQH against the CV and payer applications. Again, everything needs to match to not cause any delays or confusion. And update documents immediately after you renew them. Don't wait for CAQH to tell you you need to do it. If you update a licensure, then go ahead and store it where you store it and go, oh, I need to also upload it to CAQH. It should just be part of that process, right? Oh, I have a new DEA registration given to me by a doctor. Oh, I better make sure I get that into CAQH. Oh, we renewed our liability insurance. I better upload my face sheets. Like, it should just be part of that process. And if you're well versed in it and you do it every time, you're not going to forget. Okay. CAQH should not be treated as a one-time setup task and forget about it, okay? It needs to be part of whomever is responsible's ongoing credentialing and compliance workflow. A lot of times it's the office manager, but if you have an internal credentialing contracting person, it could be them. But then somebody needs to make sure they're staying on top of it as well and have that checks and balances that I've talked about in other videos as well, okay? CAQH management protects credentialing timelines and the practice's revenue, okay? CAQH is very handy. A lot of times after it's completed, you can go to the bottom and you can print that application with all the data, which can be very nice if you need to submit a paper application to someone and they say they'll accept the CAQH application. That's fantastic. Not all insurances will. They'll have their own application you have to complete, which stinks. But what you could do is have CAQH pulled up on one screen, have that other application pulled up on another screen, and copy and paste so that you don't have any error of manual entry. Everything's consistent and everything's coming from CAQH as the source of truth, like we talked about, okay? If you have any questions or comments about CAQH, I am pretty well versed in it, so please do not hesitate and leave that in the comments below. Smash the thumbs up button if today's video was helpful. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And as always, please share this with your colleagues whom you feel would benefit from the information. Thank you so much for the support. We will see you next time. Bye-bye.